Hello everyone! In Genshin patch 5.4, Yumemizuki Mizuki will be the one new 5-star character releasing from Inazuma. Mizuki will also be the newest standard character being added to the roster alongside units like Tainari, Dea, and Chi-Chi. Once patch 5.4 ends and patch 5.5 releases, Mizuki will be able to be pulled with your standard wishes or whenever you lose your 50-50 on the limited character banner. Being the newest standard 5-star character comes with a lot of negative connotations as standard characters aren't typically designed to be very strong characters in the meta. But even though Mizuki isn't looking to be a meta-defining character, even as a standard 5-star, she fulfills her role in the team adequately, bringing her own gameplay uniqueness and comfort to her main teams. So for this guide, I will be explaining how Mizuki works, the best ways to build her potential best teams, and analyzing her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Pretty much everything you need to know with simple and practical explanations while also giving more detailed analysis that is backed by TC. Mizuki is a 5-star Animal Catalyst user that ascends with Elemental Mastery. She is an on-fielder focused on triggering and buffing swirls while also having a source of healing. In a way, Mizuki is the 5-star version of Sayu, as both want to trigger swirls on-field and can heal. In her teams, Mizuki will serve a similar role to on-field Sucrose, driving reactions like Electrocharge. However, she will bring different buffs, utilities, and play much differently. Mizuki's elemental skill is the core of her kit. When used, she does damage and enters the Dream Drifter state. During this enhanced state, Mizuki gains some resistance to interruption but cannot normal attack or charged attack. Instead, she hovers around and shoots out an AoE Anemo attack to a nearby enemy every 0.75 seconds. These attacks have an elemental ICD of every other hit, and every time an enemy is hit, one particle will be generated up to a max of 4. Mizuki's Dream Drifter state normally lasts 5 seconds, but with her A1 passive, as long as she triggers 2 swirls, it will be extended to 10 seconds. While Mizuki is in the Dream Drifter state, she also provides 2 main buffs. First, she increases the swirl damage of all party members based on her elemental mastery. At talent level 10, a 1000 EM Mizuki will increase the damage of swirls by 450%. Second, with Mizuki's A4 passive, she can give herself 100 EM for 4 seconds whenever an enemy gets hit by a Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro attack. Mizuki's Dream Drifter state will end if you press her skill again or swap her off field. So Mizuki must be played as an on-field swirl driver, as if you press her skill and swap out, she no longer provides any of her buffs to the team. Mizuki's elemental burst is also an important part of her kit. 15-second cooldown, 60 energy cost. When used, Mizuki does AoE Anemo damage with some grouping and summons a little companion called Mini Baku that follows the active character for 12 seconds. During this period, Mini Baku will spawn a snack on the ground every 1.5 seconds. If you pick this up when your character is above 70% HP, the snack will explode and deal AoE Anemo damage. If you pick up the snack and the character is less than 70% HP, it will heal the character based off of Mizuki's elemental mastery. If you decide to not walk over the snack, then it will eventually automatically explode to deal AoE Anemo damage. At 1000 EM and talent level 10, the snack heals a character for about 3000 HP, which isn't that much. However, if Mizuki is in the Dream Drifter state and she herself is the one picking up the snack and it heals her, the healing effectiveness will be doubled, making the snack heal her for about 6000 HP, which is more significant. Thus, Mizuki isn't looking to be a powerful team healer, but a character with the ability to self-sustain while they are on field. In fact, to help with this, while Mizuki is in a Dream Drifter state, the pickup distance for the snacks is increased, making it easier for her to either heal herself or proc additional swirls. Lastly, Mizuki's special passive gives you a chance to heal more when using healing foods, with the chance increasing with the friendship level of the character. That's everything on Mizuki's base kit. Pretty straightforward, as Mizuki is a standard character. In terms of talent leveling priority, since Mizuki is a swirl based DPS that drives reactions, the most important thing to do first is to level her to 90 to increase the damage of her reactions. Then level her skill to increase her swirl damage buff, then lastly her burst to increase the healing. Mizuki is a simple and easy character to play. First, you set up some of your off-field support skills, which are likely characters with off-field turret damage like Farina. You can then Mizuki burst to proc VV early to start buffing the off-field damage. Afterwards, set up the rest of your off-field support skills, then lastly switch back to Mizuki and press skill to enter the Dream Drifter state. Mizuki can't normal or charge attack during this state, so all you do is just float around enemies, pick up snacks that are spawned, and let Mizuki's periodic animal attacks and your off-field supports do all the work. Next, let's cover Mizuki's Constellations. With C1, Mizuki will periodically mark nearby enemies. When a marked enemy gets hit by swirl damage, the mark will be consumed to increase the swirl damage done to that enemy, scaling off of Mizuki's elemental mastery. Unfortunately, this swirl damage buff from C1 is only applied additively and not multiplicatively to the swirl damage formula, so it's not an insane damage buff, but it's still a nice damage increase nevertheless. Mizuki's C2 will give the team Pyro, Hydro, electro, and cryo damage bonus during the duration of her Dream Drifter state, scaling off of Mizuki's elemental mastery. At 1000 EM, this is a 40% damage bonus while Mizuki is on field and in the Dream Drifter state. A pretty strong team buff, as it has the same exact scaling as Kazuha's A4 damage bonus buff, which is a core part of what makes him a strong support. C3 increases her skill talent level by 3, C4 makes picking up the snacks spawned by Mizuki's burst both heal and do damage, removing the HP condition that it normally has. In addition, picking up snacks will give energy to Mizuki up to 20, drastically lowering her ER requirements. C5 increases her burst talent level by 3, and lastly, C6 allows any swirl damage done by the party to crit with a fixed crit rate and crit damage, similar to how Nahida C2 can make certain dendro reactions crit. Overall, Mizuki's constellations are pretty solid, and since she will be put into the standard 5-star pool, you can theoretically get a good amount of her cons eventually if you lose enough of your 50/50s. Now, let's go over Mizuki's best build options. As a swirl trigger with elemental mastery scaling, she likes EM based weapons. Her signature weapon will give her the most amount of EM. After triggering swirl and hitting enemies with her elemental skill and burst, Mizuki will get a total of 513 elemental mastery from her signature weapon. While all this EM is strong for Mizuki for increasing her damage and buffs in her kit, other weapons that provide additional team buffs are also good choices. For instance, Nahida's signature can provide the team extra elemental mastery, which can be helpful. However, the best looking weapon that gives Mizuki EM and a strong team buff is Wandering Evenstar. At high refinements, the attack buff that it provides is very strong, and it can even outperform all the EM that Mizuki's signature provides. Other viable weapon choices include Sacrificial Fragments solely for its EM substat, the Sumeru Craftable Fruit of Fulfillment as a free-to-play option, and the 3-star Catalyst Magic Guide for Electrocharge teams. Lastly, if you're playing Mizuki with Furina, you can consider using Prototype Amber just for the extra healing that it provides for more fanfare stacks. For artifacts, Mizuki is an animo unit that relies on swirls, so 4-piece Viridescent Venerer is her best set and the only set you should be using, as the 4-piece gives both swirl damage and res shred to the swirled elements. In terms of artifact stats, Mizuki's build is straightforward. Elemental Mastery main stat on everything, as EM increases Mizuki's buffs, her healing, and the damage from all the swirls that she's triggering, as well as any subsequent reactions that those swirls are causing. For substats, you just need to aim for Energy Recharge and Elemental Mastery. As for her ER requirements, after putting a couple of Mizuki's potential teams into an ER calculator, I would recommend aiming for about 160 ER on Mizuki to have her burst every rotation. Of course, more is always helpful. Lastly, let's go over Mizuki's best team comps. Mizuki is an on-field animo driver focused on triggering swirls and subsequent chain reactions, so she will share very similar team comps where Sucrose is typically used as the on-field animo driver. These teams specialize in AoE scenarios, and while both Mizuki and Sucrose fulfill the same role, building teams with Mizuki is more restrictive. This is because Mizuki needs to be on field and in her Dream Drifter state to provide her swirl damage buff, and during this state, Mizuki cannot normal attack. She can only move around and let her skill automatically fire animo attacks. Thus, Mizuki cannot use off-field supports like Xingqiu and Yelan, which require normal attacks to proc their burst. This limits her team building options, especially because Hydro is such an important element for so many reactions. As a result, you'll have to rely on the other Hydro off-fielders that don't require normal attacks to have off-field Hydro damage, and while units like Kokomi or even Seijun can technically work, Furina will be one of Mizuki's best teammates and will be present in a lot of her best teams. Not only does her off-field Hydro not rely on normal attacks, but also, with the healing bonus granted from Furina's fanfare stacks, Mizuki's self-healing from picking up the snack spawn from her burst is sufficient enough to overheal herself, allowing Furina's A1 passive to proc, which can heal the entire team from her HP drain. For example, just like Sucrose Taser, Mizuki will be strong in an Electrocharge team comp with units like Furina, Fischl, and Ororon. In addition, because Mizuki's swirl damage buff applies to the entire party, running another animal character like Kazuha or Venti who can group and trigger swirls from off-field can be very powerful in AoE scenarios. Mizuki can also be played in aggravate teams. With two off-field electro characters like Yai and Fischl that will be triggering aggravate themselves, Mizuki will trigger electro swirls, and if this damage hits another enemy with a quicken aura, this swirl damage from a full EM Mizuki will also proc a high damage aggravate. You can also replace one of the electro characters with an off-field Hydro character to play a working Hyperbloom team. Mizuki's electro swirls can hit the Dendro cores, and since Mizuki will be full EM, the Hyperbloom procs will do a good amount of damage. You can also play a pure burning team with Mizuki where you rely on full EM Pyro swirls for damage and to perpetuate burning for units like Emily. Finally, you can just run a mix of different off-field characters that are Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo for a functional Mizuki team. These teams are also referred to as soup teams because you just proc a bunch of different reactions by mixing different elements. You just have to make sure that the character characters you use have an off-field presence so you can on-field Mizuki. In my opinion, the soup team with the most potential is with an off-field Pyro, Hydro, and Electro unit such as Mawika, Farina, and Ororon. If you want to replace Ororon for Raiden to maintain the Archon theme, you can do that too. And while some character combos for these soup teams may not be the most optimal, they will still work to facilitate Mizuki's AFK gameplay style. To conclude this Mizuki guide, I wanted to share my analysis on her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. If we compare Mizuki with a good portion of the limited 5-star characters, then she's a fairly weak unit. However, since Mizuki is a standard banner character, it makes sense to lower the expectations for her meta strength and viability and compare her with the other standard 5-stars. And among the current standard 5-star roster, Mizuki is fairly good. Similar to Sucrose, she's a solid on-field animal driver that is strong in AoE in teams like Electrocharged, Aggravate, Hyperbloom, Burning, and Soup teams where her full EM swirls can help trigger a bunch of different reactions. Now when comparing Mizuki and Sucrose, it won't be a direct one-to-one unit comparison as Mizuki has little off-field support capabilities while Sucrose does. However, we can compare the two in their roles as on-field animal drivers for their teams. In this comparison, at C0, Mizuki isn't necessarily better than Sucrose. In terms of damage, their teams such as Electrocharge do a similar amount of damage. However, Mizuki has more team building restrictions than Sucrose. Because Mizuki cannot normal attack during her Dream Drifter state, which is the source of her swirl buffs, she cannot utilize strong supports like Xingqiu or Yelan while Sucrose can. This limitation on good Hydro teammates results in Mizuki being somewhat reliant on having Farina in a lot of her best teams. In addition, Sucrose has more grouping with multiple uses of her skill and has more flexible rotations as you can swap in and out of her freely while you need to stay on field with Mizuki to stay in her Dream Drifter state. So if you're content with using Sucrose as an on-field animal driver already, Mizuki isn't going to be particularly useful. However, what Mizuki does have over Sucrose is the gameplay comfort she can bring. In some teams like Sucrose Taser, there are no healers on the team and you have to rely on things like Xingqiu's Rain Swords or Beido's Shield for survivability, which for some people it may be perfectly enough, but for others it may be difficult. In contrast, Mizuki has strong self-healing in her kit when she picks up the snacks she spawns from her burst. In addition, because Mizuki's gameplay consists of setting up your off-field support skills, swapping to Mizuki to skill, then just hovering around enemies while picking up snacks and letting the off-field and automatic attacks do all the work, Mizuki brings a more AFK gameplay style that more casual players may enjoy. Thus, Mizuki can be considered the safer and more comfy version of Sucrose as an on-field animal driver. Although Mizuki does have her flaws in terms of more limited teammate options, if you are able to overcome these restrictions, Mizuki is able to provide something unique that Sucrose can't: healing to make the team comfier to play, and a more casual and relaxed gameplay style. Mizuki, like Sucrose, is solid in her role as an on-field animal driver, especially against multiple enemies where her swirls and swirl buffs can shine. In this AoE niche, Mizuki is very strong in her teams. Unfortunately, Mizuki's biggest strength is her biggest limitation when considering her potential strength in the meta. Because Mizuki's kit relies on her on-fielding with her skill, she doesn't have much off-field support capabilities and will typically be only played as an on-field swirl driver. But because swirl is inherently good in AoE scenarios and much weaker in single target, she can struggle in endgame content like Spiral Abyss, where many chambers with the strictest damage checks are typically single target oriented. HOYOMiX is releasing an Abyss specifically for her release with a lot of mobs and an additional swirl damage buff as a leyline disorder, and in these combat scenarios, Mizuki will be very strong, but it is unlikely that these types of abysses will commonly appear again. If I were to compare Mizuki with the other standard 5-stars and rank them based on strength and value, I do think Mizuki is one of the better 5-star standard characters you can get. I don't think she's as valuable as Jean if you don't have an animal healer for Farina teams, nor do I think she's better than Tighnari, who is a fairly strong Dendro DPS, especially with Constellations. However, I do think Mizuki deserves to be in the tier below Jean and Tighnari, as she is a strong unit for AoE scenarios, performing similarly as an on-field swirl driver to Sucrose while providing more comfy and casual gameplay. Even though Mizuki is somewhat redundant in that role because of the existence of Sucrose, she still performs well in that niche and provides unique utilities to a team, similar to how a niche support like Dea can be useful in the right scenarios. And as a newer 5-star being introduced to the standard roster, Mizuki has some strong constellations that will improve her performance in her teams. Ultimately, because Mizuki is a standard 5-star, I would never recommend anyone to pull for her directly on her own banner unless you really like her and want her immediately on her release. Once Mizuki's patch is over and the next patch comes out, you will always have the chance of getting Mizuki with your standard wishes or when you lose your 50-50 on the limited banner. On top of that, the devs did mention that the 5-star standard selector they introduced in 5.0 will return for every new anniversary patch, so the next time we get the 5-star standard selector, you'll be able to choose Mizuki for free then. But while her initial pull value is definitely low, as a standard unit that you could eventually get later on, Mizuki is a fine unit that does her job as an on-field Anima Swirl driver well. She will be one of the standard 5-stars that I wouldn't be that disappointed in getting whenever I lose my 50-50s. And that's everything I wanted to cover about Mizuki. I hope this guide and analysis was helpful to you all in giving you a better understanding of everything related to Mizuki. Just clicking and watching the video helps the channel out immensely, and if you want to show even more support, consider liking or sharing the video, or click the subscribe button for more Genshin analysis videos in the future. Leave any questions in the comments, and for all of you planning on wishing, I wish you all the best of luck on your Mizuki pools.